Welcome to the Pregnancy Loss Podcast, the place I created for moms like us. Pregnancy loss is all-encompassing and creates an overarching theme that runs through our lives forever. We have to learn to live with and beside the grief of losing our baby. We have to learn how to live again, how to parent again, how to engage and interact and be social again, how to communicate effectively to connect with our spouses and significant others. We have to find who we are now. I'm here to empower and inspire you to live a life even with our unique circumstances. We cannot change what happened, but we can grow and use that strength and resilience to create a life that we love. I'm here to share everything I know about grief, motherhood, loss, marriage, friendship, and parenting. I'm here to encourage you to find the beautiful side of grief, the side where we don't have to isolate ourselves or suppress the need to share stories, the side where you have moms just like you to support and encourage you. The side where we become the best versions of ourselves, not in spite of our loss, but thanks to it. Pregnancy loss is devastating, but it can also be an opportunity to reflect on who we were and who we want to become. So join me every Tuesday for a new episode on the Pregnancy Loss Podcast. Let's jump in. Hi, Lacey. Today we have Lacey with us. I don't want to mess up what you do. You're a therapist,
Yes.
right? Okay. So I'll have you introduce yourself and talk to us a little bit what you do and what your main focus is with your therapy practice.
Yes. So I'm a licensed professional counselor. Originally started out as a registered play therapist, did a lot of play therapy work, and then switched to working mainly with the perinatal mental health population around 2017. And from there, got even more specific with the type of work that I do. And most of what I see is pregnancy loss all through the whole, any timeline from those struggling, going through a lot of IVF treatments or any fertility treatments, do some consultations for that, and really do value and love the work that I do with those that have lost along the way and at any stage, and even in infancy.
Yeah. I know that's, I love what you do. I know when we first connected, I was super excited to learn more about your sand therapy.
Yes.
So I was because I've heard about it, but I never knew, even when I go to therapy, it's not an offering. It's not something that every therapist is trained in. And it's so hard to find somebody who's okay, I need somebody who knows perinatal mental health or maternal mental health. I need somebody who knows grief and trauma, and I need somebody who can do sand therapy or art therapy or, something tangible, not just talk therapy.
Right.
So kind of tell us about sand therapy and how you use that with your maternal mental health patients or your lost patients and how it helps them.
Yeah. So sand tray therapy is an expressive art, and there's kind of a broader term. A lot of people consider themselves sand therapy professionals, and there's different types in that. I do sand tray therapy, and I did a lot of training around it in graduate school, and it is considered a play therapy in a lot of ways. So that was my exposure with it. But what I love about it is I don't just have to use it with kids. I use it with adults as well. And I found it really helpful in this population because what sand tray therapy is, it's an expressive art and a projective mode of psychotherapy, or the therapy that we use. And you get to process a lot of your interpersonal issues by using specific materials like what we call miniatures or figurines, and it helps with the nonverbal way of communicating. This is all led by the clients and facilitated by a trained therapist. Now, that's a definition that is used with as sand tray therapist in the field that I fortunately got to learn from in grad school. And it's in their book, Sand Tray Therapy by Homeyer and Sweeney. But that not as important. I just want to give credit when I take that definition there. But it's kind of it's just another way of being able to process a story, which is really helpful for people. You mentioned that talk therapy, there's a lot of great witnessing that we can do, and people need to have those words, but sometimes we just don't have the words. And this is another way to say, how can I put my story out there and have it be witnessed in a different way? And it brings up for a lot of people, a lot of things are kind of in the unconscious or really deep down in there that they can put it out in front of them and show it to someone. And it's really powerful in that way, because sometimes you may not even need the words. A person can build, and I'll talk in a second how we set up Sand Tray. They just are like, when I was building that, I didn't realize some of these things were there. I haven't thought about that in so long. And now that's coming up again. And I realized it's something that I need to unpack and I need to process, or it's something that's really stuck there. Or I realized that's a trigger for me that I haven't thought about in a while. And so what's great about it too, one of the most important things that Sand Tray can do is it creates this therapeutic distance where sometimes it may be too hard to say those things verbally, but then you get another way just to have it out there with like a scene with the miniatures and the tray. So again, some people, like I realize I said, some people may not even have the words at all and they don't even have to use them. So going back to that point, they may have everything laid out in the tray and they can look at it. And if they want to share with me, they can. And sometimes they just may spend the whole session building the tray and just kind of reflecting upon it internally. And I encourage people to, when we're processing the tray afterwards, what they built, to journal about it, to write about it. So it's something they can take with them and continue processing out throughout the week, throughout the months. So it has a lot of great qualities in that way. So I'll let you kind of guide me a little more in some questions here. Cause
no. Yeah, you're good. I'm just listening. Yeah. When I had my loss, I didn't even know where to begin. Mm-hmm. Like it was my third baby, and I feel like when it happened, I didn't even know that was a possibility. So like just being able to talk about the loss is one thing, but I find it so funny that we talk about play therapy for kids, like, because that's how their brain functions. That's how they work things out. That's how they learn. That's how they process. But I feel like it's the exact same thing for us too. And I think that so much emphasis is put on talk therapy that we don't know to search for something else. We don't know that there's something else that can help with a different part of the trauma that we can't get out just from talking. Like it has to be brought out from physical, tangible tools. Besides the Sand Tray therapy, what is another mode that you use, or something that you suggest to your clients, like this will help you like on your grief journey, or this will help you process what happened? Like, is there something else that you love using?
Yeah. So included with the expressive arts, I will have things in my office, like little model magic or art materials to draw. I love combining everything that you can do, something that uses your hands, because that is opening up parts of your brain that are not just the verbal. And we need that. That's what taps into kind of the unconscious and what's going on there. And when we think about being, playful for kids, they're getting to do that. They're incorporating all sides of their brains. And that is really what helps us integrate any traumas that we've been through. So drawing something, it can be a direct prompt of like what's coming up to you when you think about what's going on, or let's just draw what you feel in your body right now. What, just anything. It can be abstract. It doesn't have to have a certain, you may look at it and be like, none of us know what this means, but we're going to sit and talk about it and see what does that bring up for you? What emotions, what thoughts, what sensations in your body as we're processing this art. And especially with the Sand Tray, when I start out with people, so here's how it's set up. I have this tray that's full of sand and tons of miniatures that represent all sorts of things. There can be structures, trees. What else do I have? Animals, cars, vehicles, medical equipment, two very direct, like representing of, I have great they're like these resin hearts that look like there's a tiny fetus inside, and they represent different weeks that I've purchased on Etsy.
Oh, that's
and those
amazing.
Are very helpful for people because some, the loss can occur at any time, and it's still just as powerful of a loss as any. I think we hear people say that all the time. I feel like no one's acknowledging my loss because it was an early miscarriage or it was so early on. So I like to have different stages that people can see. And some of them do look like, a 12-week fetus. And so when people are looking at that, it can be activating for them. And I notice that. I let people know that ahead of time. When I say, here's Santré, I want you to create a world. The first few times, I just want you to notice the miniatures and put whatever comes to you. If it brings up a sensation or a feeling, good or bad, and it says, I need to be in your world today, just go ahead and put it in there. And then when you complete it, we'll look at it together and we'll talk through it. So that's one thing I let them know too. You may see some stuff that's pretty activating. And if you need to avoid that today, that's fine. And if you need to go ahead and put it in there, that's great. As we do more Santrés and they get more comfortable, then I'll probably be more. They're coming in and we're going to talk for a few minutes about how their week has been, what's mainly on their mind. And from that, I say, you seem to really be talking a lot about the day you went to the hospital, or the day you remember that you got the news, or the day it actually was happening that you were miscarrying. Let's go ahead and build something around that. And then what that does when they're building, you're using your hands, you're nonverbal. I'm doing this in silence. I'm letting them process how they need. And as we go through it, then I'm checking in on what is that miniature, which part of it right now seems like it's bringing up the most for you and wants to start. What do the miniatures, do they have anything to say? Are they speaking to you? Is there something they want you to know? Is there something they want me to know? I want it to be very much in the client's corner and under their, power to say, this is what I want to share, or I can go there, or I don't. And sometimes I may just have them sit and notice. And that's where I can bring in the journaling. You don't have to say it out loud. Write it down. And then once we've kind of processed, it brings up all sorts of wonderful things. I've had people say, wow, I really was feeling, maybe guilty about something. And I'm holding it inside my body. And I realize that I have this pit in my stomach. And now I feel like I finally had a place that I can put it in front of me and see it and share it with you in that way. And that's giving that good release that we need, right? And again, I talked about that therapeutic distance. Sometimes it feels a little bit safer and easier to share it when it's in a different form. Because there may be even times that if a client needs it, I can say, it doesn't necessarily have to be on that person, if that makes sense. I can say, how would a person feel if they had gone through that? And, based on what they're showing in their tray. If someone else had been in your position, what would you want them to know? Or how do you think they would be feeling? So it just makes it a little bit easier. It's like you said, what we're doing with kids, it's so important for them. Why not share that with adults? And I think that a lot of people get surprised when I say, like, I do Santré therapy mainly with adults in this population. They're like, really? I thought that was for kids. And the adults even come in and they're like, why do you have all these figurines? Are you just like, they're like, you're kind of quirky. You collect all these things. I'm like, oh, that's not just for me to collect. So I let them know that, the common misconceptions about Santré is that it's not only used with children, but it is a very different process for adults than it is for children. Yeah. Whereas children, they may not be as literal with it. And sometimes the adults can be, like, looking at it and it's like, that's what it represents. That is me, what I looked like in the hospital. Because like I mentioned, I have medical equipment. They're like, that's me laying on the hospital bed, and there's the empty crib next to it. Or here's where I wanted a baby to be and it's not there. So again, it gives that powerful image that they can kind of, play around with and say, what would it have been like when I felt like these were my hopes and expectations that the baby would be there. And then now I'm looking at this tray and I'm seeing that empty, cradle or whatnot. That's what they're facing when they go home, right? And then they really get to bring that visual into therapy with me, and I can hold that space for them. So whereas kids sometimes will go into the tray, they'll do some stuff and they're, a lot more in a metaphor, not saying adults aren't, but they can
like abstract, less black and white.
The kids kind of like shake it off. They're like, oh yeah, that's too much. And they'll go play with something else, where, as the adults, they're really sitting
very aware.
And I have to kind of tune in and see, is there a time that maybe they're dissociating a little bit, or this seems like this is really hard to say. I'm wondering, and I can tie it back into their body. What sensations are you noticing? Sometimes the sand itself is very helpful just to put your hands in and rub your hands through. It's very soothing. So it can be very grounding. And the tray itself is kind of like a big containment tool. Everything that's really hard that they're putting in that tray, it's actually in a square or a rectangle. It's contained. And so at the end of it, when it is very difficult, I can say, now, is there anything that we need to add to it that helps you, close this for today or help you feel like you can contain it throughout the week? So there's a resource, or like we can find an inner strength. So oftentimes I say, look back at the miniatures. What else do you want to add? And people will find maybe like a box or a cage. And then they say, this was the hard memory. I want to put it inside for a bit. So they're actually physically, it's like that figurative and literal being able to put something in a box and contain it until, we're able to process it again. So
that's so cool.
Other misconceptions that I will say about sand tray is, some people think any therapist can do sand tray. Yes and no. Be sure you get proper training and you understand what it is that you're doing and the reasonings behind it, because a lot of people will go in and immediately start saying, oh, I see that, I'm trying to think oh, I see that little fetal figure of a person laying there crying. That must be you. And we can't do that. What if a person's not ready to say that that's me? And what if it represents something else? So we want to be sure we're not putting things there that aren't there for the client. We need it to come from them. We need them to say, this is what it means to me. And even if they don't know what that means yet, then we sit with that and say, let's just
we don't want to give words to them.
Yeah.
Yeah. I find that a lot with when family members and friends, they want to be supportive and they want to do something. They want to be able to help them. And I feel like what we've been so detached from in our society is just being able to witness and actually just sit and listen and realize that we don't have to fix them. We can't fix them. There's nothing that we can do that's going to heal them. But we also don't realize how powerful just being with them is. Just being silent, having somebody sit with you and just hold, knowing you could do or say anything and it'll be okay. Knowing that you don't have to do anything or say anything or be anything or, have to take care of them. You can just be in that space. That's what I really try to focus on in my training for doulas is learning how to be uncomfortable and letting it be okay. Because a lot of us are really uncomfortable with grief. We're very uncomfortable when it comes to dead babies, because these are not things that are supposed to happen. Oh, there's no rules around it. And people try to fill that void and that quietness with unhelpful phrases, and luckily I never experienced that, but a lot of people have. I thought that was just being able to witness. And then the other part you were talking about, where whether you're doing the sand tray therapy or talk therapy, witnessing where the grief and the trauma or the pain or the emotion or the feeling is sitting in your body, because we've also become so disconnected from our brain. Our mind-body connection is not very, there's not much awareness in it for a lot of us. And I think that we forget that the things that we experience do show up in parts of us. And I've been doing that in therapy lately for myself, is realizing that a lot of my childhood trauma shows up in my chest, in my stomach, the places that I try to cradle it and hold it, and keep it safe, keep me safe. So I think talking about that, especially for your grief patients, is that something that you, how would I phrase this? Do you work on this with all your lost clients, learning where it?
That's what's so great about sand tray too, because it's a tool that you can bring in. You can mix it with any modality. So for those that are therapists or those that are aware of kind of the therapy language that I'm about to use here, I mix sand tray with internal family systems, parts work, and I mix it with EMDR, because again, it's something that we can create, then we can look at, do some bilateral stimulation and eye movements to help reprocess that trauma. also all sorts of things come up with it. You're mentioning kind of that family piece or the outside world piece of people kind of being so uncomfortable with the grief that they're trying to fill it with what's comforting, what I think is comforting for you, because that's more it's comforting for me to get through this. I've seen it come up in the sand trays where people will share what it was like at the hospital and saying, well, I felt like I was laying there and I needed my mom to do this, or I needed so-and-so to do this, or a person said this. And then they just get, again, another way to play that on their tray. And we can talk about how to handle those things in the future. And then tying it back to the body, all of those things that I use, like internal family systems, EMDR, there's a somatic component to it that I'm always bringing it into. And what a lot of people do realize is, oh my gosh, it's bringing up traumas that I've endured all my life that I need to process as well. So then, trauma or sand tray therapy is so great for trauma in that way. Again, I talked about the sensory qualities of it, getting to play in the sand, getting the containment. It is helpful because, again, it gets you, it feels safer because there is a playful side to it, even though there's some really heavy content going into the tray. And I think that we all really need that, especially as adults, something to tap into, maybe a time that felt safer, which it may bring up times that were really hard as well. But that's how trauma works in us as well. We go through something currently and it does have this whole network that it lights up of things in the past. And so we have space to go over that too, if and when that comes up for people. And we can talk about how does that all relate to what's going on right now. And I think that, again, I talked about the integration of it. It's like there's this verbal world, there's this unconscious world, and sand tray really is like this bridge to kind of getting to both of those connecting. And it's just beautiful when it comes out for people. And I love to witness that for them.
Yeah. Okay, I wrote down so many things. Where do I start? But so there was something that I was feeling about this. Well, I guess when it comes to family and friends and support, do you ever get the mom coming in with their spouse or their like maybe mom or dad? Or
it's interesting.
Is it mainly?
I do like to invite people to, after we've done some work, if they feel safe and they want someone to witness it, there's a couple things that I can do. With any of the work that I do, and sand tray especially can help with this, is I do see couples when there is a shared loss. If there's, they're processing together a stillbirth or a TFMR, things like that, I will see couples for, and I have used sand tray with them because it is a great way. I've seen it work so many times where both partners are sitting there, the birthing person and the non-birthing person, where they have like kind of their own separate trays that they're recreating what happened for them, what they remember of like the worst day of their life or the worst several days of their life. And then they share that with each other and they're saying, wow, I didn't even know that's what it was like for you. Or we never really got to talk about that. Or we did talk about it, but I didn't know that there was this other side of it. And it really helped them see each other's perspective. And then having them come in and do a tray together in the same one. And having, I remember a husband saying to his wife, he was like, I saw those things. And this really helps me see more the guilt that you were carrying, how much responsibility you were putting on yourself. And he got to create, when he shared his side, he was like, this is what I see of you. I see you as the most like powerful, strong, person to have to go through this, to be able to bear that. And you're still going and trying to keep everything up for the family. And it was also a way to say, you can take a break. Like, don't put all that on your shoulders. I'm here too. So it is something that could be used if someone wanted to bring in a parent or a spouse. Say we weren't doing the couples therapy from the start, they could bring them in. Yeah. I also encourage people, in sand tray world, there's a lot of people say, no, we don't want people to take pictures of their work and take it home, especially with kids. I think sometimes because, you're not able to really, someone may look at a picture of a tray and start interpreting, right? They're not trained professionals.
Wrong way.
They may be like, well, what's that? Yeah. And sometimes we do this as parents or other people. We make it about us when it's not. So I say, let's hold off on that, but let's be cautious. Some people, I think we've processed it very well. And I think it is a helpful tool for them to say, listen, this is what I talked about with Lacey today. And this is what it's like for me, that I don't have the words to say. And this really helped me with this. So they can share that with that person. So there's a lot of prepping that we'll do around that if someone wants to share the work that they've done in therapy, or take pictures of their sand tray and take it. I will say that there's a lot of prep work around it, but it can be very powerful for them to be able to share with the people on the outside.
Yeah. Do you, with the relationships, this is something else that's not really talked about, is that when a big trauma happens or you're grieving, everybody grieves differently. I feel like when I grew up as a kid, we were given the 5 stages of grief. We assumed everybody took the steps to grieving, and then that was it. And then grieving was done. And so for me, my experience in I'm 4 years out from my daughter dying, and I still experience grief as if it just happened again. Like the power of that. And then how that affects my relationship with my husband, because we have more trauma surrounding that than some people because of something else that happened. But how do you guide your clients through being okay with the fact that they grieve differently, and how you support them in, being okay with it? Like, do you have like a process for that, or what do you like to?
I think it's just letting people know too that sometimes people don't realize that the grieving process is different for everyone, and that it's, again, we get to this, we take this the staircase, and we get to the top and we're done. And that's not it at all. We talk with people. I let them be aware of the triggers that may come up. One, there's some triggers we can expect. And then there's everyday triggers you're never going to be able to predict no matter what you do. And they're just going to hit you in a different way. So we talk about how people do that differently and how to have grace for each other with that. And what are some of the things that maybe you need to let your partner know when you're in a moment of grief that is very overwhelming. And it's like, well, we thought we were at the top of the staircase, but here we're back down again.
Yeah.
And I think it's just mainly
so disheartening,
finding the way to express that to your partner. And again, sharing grace with each other, that it's going to hit you in different ways, because you have some shared meaning around it, but you do have some different meaning around what the loss is and what your relationship with that loss continues to look like. So many people think, well, someone dies, our relationship's over. No, we still have an ongoing relationship with people. We just are figuring out, what does that relationship look like now? And some people do tend to avoid or say, well, it's done, we got to shut it down. Whereas other people really need to still sit with it a little longer. So that is a good time that I can bring a partner in and just have them. I think sharing the stories with each other is something really powerful, because there will always be something, again, that they thought the other person knew, but there wasn't.
Right.
I think it helps give so much compassion and empathy too, when you have that shared space with each other, with, someone who can be there and be objective and kind of hold that space for both of you to say, wow, and what is it like for you right now when you're hearing her say that, or what is it like when you're hearing him? And so, I think that's it. It's just finding ways to share, hold space and grace for each other.
I think that would be when you were talking about having both of them do their own sand tray and being able to see the other's perspective. I think it's incredible. And I think the whole world is magical. So when we each look at a situation, the death of our child, and how differently we put meaning into what happened, or different situations that happen, and we look at it differently and we feel it differently. And I mean, the differences between what a mom and a dad or birthing person and their other, significant other experiences can be so vastly different. And I think too, that's what really alters the relationship, when they don't have somebody helping to facilitate being able to express it in a healthy way with each other, whereas people who may not search out therapy or whatever, they're just going at each other and like, I can't believe you don't feel this way. Like, you don't feel how, my pain, and you weren't there. You're not the one giving birth. Like, all these things. So I always find therapy to be so valuable because the facilitation piece of having between two people is so important. So like, especially with a loss, because when you go home from the hospital, you don't have the nurses and the doctor helping to facilitate what's going on, what's going to happen next. And that's kind of where I'm trying to bridge the gap by teaching doulas and postpartum doulas how to help them learn what it may be like when they do get home and when they are home. Because after you lose a baby, I mean, unless you have to have like maybe a D&C and you have to like go in for extra checkups and stuff, you only have that 6-week checkup. Still to this day, they think that is enough for moms to be healed and to feel okay. Like, that's not even a long enough term, for your postpartum depression or maybe anxiety or to like show up, like, cause it can show up months later and you don't realize what it is. So having these people, like different types of support is so important. Like, when you have a couple come in, are there certain resources you give them? So besides like having a therapist for them, is there any other really important aspects of care for trauma or grief that you really think helps?
Absolutely. There are some, when a couple is ready, sometimes I recommend there's, Don't Talk About the Baby documentary. And I say that, because again, anytime you have another way to verb something that you're going through other people's words, whether that's written or you hear it, it just can help with that things that you don't always know how to say. And it can help with that bit of how to interact with family or friends on the outside. So sometimes I say, well, why don't you watch that together and then see if it brings up anything for you that you can share with each other or that you want to do, with family. Cause that's a whole separate thing too, is like dealing with your in-laws and how did we talk about grief? How did we do things growing up when we were little? Did we sweep it under the rug? Do we not talk about Bruno, And some of the other side of the family is like, we do talk about Bruno and we go into it. And that can be really hard when you're kind of mixing people's own grief and how they handle it with their families and whatnot. But I think that if there's podcasts, I really love, there's some groups around here through the Ronald McDonald House that are specifically for people with, different stages of loss, because while they're all valid and important, it's really hard for someone with like a later term or stillbirth to be with someone who had an early term loss. So there's different groups for that. And all the couples that I've recommended to go, that has been so healing because they meet other couples going through the same thing. There can be maybe reading. I recommend, if there's any book that I would recommend for an individual to read, for both of them to read it together. And then it's something they can bring into therapy and we will discuss those feelings. Because it kind of takes me back to the witnessing part of it. What can be so hard for some people is each other. I think whether you're male, female, birthing partner, non-birthing partner, you're going to have different levels of holding on to a bit of guilt or feeling responsibility for what happened.
Yeah.
And we want to take that away from everyone, right? We can talk all day and say, this is not your fault. We have all the evidence, medical or beliefs, whatever. And if someone is still feeling that, they have to sit there and they have to really be able to process that on their own. So I encourage people, as whether you're a therapist or you're a partner, just to validate that feeling. Say, I understand that that's something you're carrying. I wish I could take it away from you, but I'm here to listen too if you need to talk through that or hold on to that for a little bit longer. So I see that come up so much. We talk about common themes that will come up in the sand tray, and that's one of them, is that bit of my responsibility or my guilt. What did I do, or what should I have done? What could I have done? And then I will say, okay, like if you need to walk through that, walk through it. I'm here. And at the end, I'm going to try to find a way to, bring them out. Like, say, Sandra can be something that makes you go really deep, really fast. And at the end, I have to be able to kind of bring someone back up, right, before I let them leave. So again, a little containment exercise, or go find a miniature that represents some hope or something that will help you feel not as deep in it as we just got with it, because it does go really fast. That is the thing about expressive arts. All of these things that I learned from the sand tray through my client stories, I could probably learn, and I will learn verbally. But this just kind of gets it to a different way, maybe faster sometimes, or that's where it just needed to be. That was what needed to come up for the person that day, or that week when I see them. So I love it in that way. It really kind of touches into where's the client, what are their needs at that moment. So
it's amazing.
When I do trainings for people, I love to teach about how sand tray is great for therapists to use. I have so many examples. I give pictures. I even have some recordings of sessions that I've done to show like what themes are coming up, how is a person's processing through that. So when they ask like, why is sand tray so great? I'm like, well, here are the examples. Here's what I've come up with, what the people have been able to do. And yes, we will probably get to those things, but I think we got to it a little bit quicker.
Yeah, definitely. I feel like with expressive therapies, you peel back the layers quicker. You're able, it's like, whereas talk therapy, it's like you talk about the one thing, and when you're, you've exhausted everything you can about talking about that, then you talk about the next thing that has been brought up from it. And it is a slower process, I think. Just seeing it from a client's point of view, because I'm not a therapist, but from having like this amazing therapist, because I've had some really crappy ones.
Of course.
I feel like it's just finding a doctor. Like I think that's something that stops a lot of people from getting therapy or getting help when they're experiencing a trauma or going through grief, because it is so hard to find somebody that ticks all the boxes, like, because it's not a one size fit all. You can't just like pick somebody out of a Google search and that's great. That's it. And it's like finding a doula. Like if you go to your session and it's just like really terrible and you're like, oh, this is what therapy is. I thought I was expecting something different, and then they don't go ever again. I find that a lot, like, oh, that didn't work for me, but it's because that person wasn't working for them and the way they were doing it wasn't working for them. So I like always in all of my podcast episodes, I'm like, I will always recommend therapy. Like even just having a non-biased person who has no idea who you are, what you're going through, can give you a different perspective and a new way to look at it. Because grief, you have to find different ways to look at it. And that's where I think people do the whole, find the silver lining, or if they're religious, they use it as, they use their religious upbringing and the way they think religiously to justify what happened. It's really hard though to find. I'm not religious. So for me, those things don't make sense. And I find with grieving moms, trying to find why it happened when most of the time they'll never know. I feel like, because statistically, early miscarriages happen because, and typically I think the statistic was 90% of early miscarriages, like before the 12-week mark, were because of a genetic anomaly, something was wrong, that type of thing. And it obviously does not make it easier. But they have a reason, right? Like there was a physical reason why this baby couldn't be here. And I'm noticing the more I get into pregnancy loss education, there is a significant difference between a miscarriage and a stillbirth. And it's not the emotional side of it. It's not the way that we feel, because they're all of our babies, but I think there's different emotions and different emotions attached to both types. Do you find, I guess, is there a common theme that you see between all your losses, or like a main reason, the main reason they need help, or they're trying to look for something, or they want to feel better, or is there a common theme between all your clients that you find?
The common themes around any type of loss, just with across the timeline of pregnancy loss, is one, the validation of, even with stillbirth, some people are like, well, it's time to move on, or you never met that child, or it could have been worse. So I think there's again, we talked about this witnessing, the validation, and then also all across the board, that responsibility and that guilt piece of people coming in and saying, I feel like my body betrayed me, or I don't understand my body. I can't trust it. So then, we get into people when they're trying to, eventually most people are like, I'm ready to try again. Then we're coping with pregnancy after loss, the anxiety that comes with that, the fear of, am I trying to replace that child or that baby, but then I'm not spending enough time being connected to this pregnancy because I'm thinking about the last pregnancy and I'm comparing them too much. So I think that, yes, the main common themes are just coping in general. How do I be able to still talk about the loss that I had and the significance that it had for me, and how the relationship, again, still is continuing. And now I don't know how to parent my living child versus my child that died, or that I never got to meet, or that I had at TFMR. And I let people know, you're still a parent to both of them, and you are still trying to figure out how to parent two children here. And it's a different way than a lot of people will never understand, and they don't want to wrap their heads around. So I think that's where they get.
Okay. Yeah.
I do have kind of a case study that I wrote about a sand tray with a client, and she did have a religious piece of it that came where she was struggling with her religion after it, feeling like, what is the purpose, and how do I feel about God? So it's an interesting, even though I don't consider myself like a religious counselor, people can bring in whatever they need, and I'm there to process that with them. And that's something else the tray can do, where I have a lot of images of religious or spiritual items that people can put in and say, well, this is how I feel about it. So I think it's great to be open to be able to walk down that path with someone in whatever way they need to. And, I was thinking too, one of the hard things when we were talking earlier about the disconnection between mind and body, and we as a society have gotten really good at disconnecting the two. And I think for someone with a loss like this, there's even more of a reason that they're disconnected, right? Because again, I don't trust my body, or my body's carrying too much like trauma memory of this, that is too painful to think about. I don't want to connect with that part. And then I do have to work with them to say, I know that this is going to feel uncomfortable, but let's try to reconnect you with that. Because again, those are the parts that are stuck, and we want to try to be able to find those and help them have a place to go. And then that's what is going to be part of the healing.
Yeah. The pregnancy after loss piece, that I struggled with that too, like trying to figure out how it can happen when we go through these thoughts like, oh, our bodies were made for this. Like, how can a baby die when we were made to carry these babies? Like for me, my daughter, with all my babies, I always did the early genetic testing, and everything was perfect. It was the most perfect pregnancy I've ever experienced. Like all my other pregnancies were miserable and I hated them. And I was like, I don't know why people do this. And then I got pregnant with Evelyn, and things were just amazing. I was just elated all the time about everything. It was beautiful. And like, my body went into labor on its own for the first time ever. Both 2 times before I had to be induced. So everything was just perfect. And like, this was just meant to be. Like, I was so excited to be a mom of 3 girls, because I have a horrid, toxic, disconnected relationship with my mom, who's no longer can't be in my life. And so I was excited to be that change for them, to have that relationship. And then went into triage, and her heart stopped beating, and there was like no rhyme or reason. And then she came out, and they're like, and the placenta came right out with her. So they're like, oh, it could have been a partial placental abruption. Oh, the cord was wrapped too tightly. Could have been a cord accident. Like all of these, like, when you have like your doctors and your nurses not able to tell you, you know, because we expect them as medical professionals, we hang on to their every word.
Yeah.
And for them not to know why, I feel like that immediately is like, then it's me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And being,
when I'm working through that with people, I say, because we want an answer. We want something that is, you know, has no sense that it happened. We want to make sense of it, because that helps us know, well, what can I do next time? Or what do I need to avoid next time? Because there's that fear of, what if I go through this again? You know, people all the time, we're working through this quote that I get from everyone is, I no longer am going to have a normal pregnancy again. And I'm like, yeah, you're right. You won't have that bliss, carefree. Things are going to be okay, because now this is part of it. This is a reproductive trauma, and it's going to come up in anything that's related reproductively in the future. So I say it makes sense that sometimes we hold on to those things because we just want to know, because we want the assurance that things are going to be okay. That's a lot of hard anxiety to deal with for, 9 months if you're getting to that full-term birth, right? And people find themselves not being able to excel until the baby is born and they're holding them. And then even then, now there's new fears and anxieties, right, that come in that are even more intense.
Parenting after loss. Yeah. That's another one.
So, when I go back to that article, if anyone wants to look into it, if you go to the World Association of Sand Therapy Professionals, they have a journal, and one of mine is in there about sand tray with perinatal loss. And I do work with someone through I want to say it was a 15-week loss through some infertility struggles, through getting pregnant again and having that child. So there's a lot of, content material that we go over, and there's pictures of her tray in there as well. So people can look more at it, learn more through that case study. I want to say the other thing too, when you're asking about common themes, for a lot of people, it's hard to go there and share specifics of a story. So what I'm calling, your storytelling, your narrative around this. But for most people, it's on their minds. Every detail is on their minds, and they're playing it over and over and over. And that is so hard to hold inside. So being with a therapist that and you feel you can trust with these hard things, I have to be able to sit there and not make a face if someone says something that I'm like, oh gosh, that's too much. Because that's what you're really getting from the outside world, is like, this is too uncomfortable. That's sad. I can't go there. And some people just need to be like, it's on my mind. I need to say it. I need to talk about all the graphic details. So that is another way that Sand Tray really helps. It's giving that expression to the non-verbalized things that they don't really get to share, but are constantly on their minds. So I want to say that that's the other thing, is just being able to sit with the hard parts, like the details of it, that some people just really need to be able to go through and say out loud, or draw, or put in a sand tray, or write a poem about, and they just need it to be heard. So they're not, again, holding it inside.
Yeah.
Just all themselves.
That's the graphic part. Like, and it's funny because it's not even that it's graphic, like, unless, of course, the baby has deteriorated a bit, or, something like that. But like where am I going to start with this? So I feel like it's the morbidity piece. So for me, when I was in that hospital bed holding Evelyn, like, she was a 40-week, 5-day baby. Like, she was a baby. Like, people don't see that though. When you just tell them you had a stillbirth, your brains will fill in the blank. Like, if there is not a completion to the loop or the pattern, like, it'll fill that in for you. So like, I'm sitting there holding her, and I'm like, God, isn't this morbid? Like, I'm holding my dead baby. Like, should I be, I mean, should I be touching her? Like, but because of that, and because I had nobody, everyone was like, and that's the other thing. Like, I can't remember half of what happened that day still. The memory loss, because of my brain trying to protect me from everything. I'm sure they were telling me that it was your baby and it's fine. And, this is like when you'll get to parent her. This is the only thing you'll be able to do. But because of those thoughts of the morbidity and the mortality and the scare, just the words like holding your dead baby, I was too scared to like give her a bath or unwrap her, and I have so many regrets around this because I wish I would have seen her body. Like I saw her head and her hands and her feet, but my nurse gave her bath. My nurse dressed her for me because I didn't know what to do. And it's like, I couldn't even make the decision to do it. I sat there just holding her all day in one position, basically. And they'll say to sit her down. So that's what I'm really trying to allow for the moms that listen to my podcast and that I'm trying to help, is being able to talk about it without warning somebody they need to talk about it. Like the whole trigger warning thing to me is shit. I will not use that. I will not, I will do everything I can.
And I can share it. Just have, as everyone else gets a privilege to share theirs.
Exactly. It's like your kid like having a terminal illness and being in the hospital. You don't put trigger warnings on that. Yeah. You want to share it because that is your child. And just because they're older than my child was means nothing. There's no difference in the love that I have for this baby and the need to share. So that's one of the things I'm very big on. I'm like, I will not use trigger warnings. It completely defeats the purpose of trying to normalize pregnancy loss.
Right. Yeah. So we're talking, again, a place where people can share all those things, not have to say the trigger warning and know that it's okay. And it's not going to, do I need to filter this or monitor it because someone's going to not be able to handle it? When someone needs to go into that, they need to go into it. And I think about you saying, grieving the parts of the things like either you didn't do or that your mind was protecting you from. That's a lot of the processing that we're doing as well, is why did your body protect you from that? And I know you have a sadness because you feel like that was like the time that you got with them and you needed to know everything at the moment or do every single thing with them and you didn't get to. That is another thing that I can put as a prompt in a sand tray, is to say, what would you have done had you been in a different state of mind, or that you wish you could do, as well as encouraging people, if you want to, please bring any memory books or the pictures that you had from if Now I Lay Me Down to Sleep came in and took pictures. What do you want to share with me? I want to know about your baby. I want to know, is it okay if do you want to share their name with me? Or did you have a nickname? Is that a name I can use? I have a client that I work with. We've worked with each other for a long time, even through like another pregnancy and birth after a loss. She said, this is the name of the baby. Because I asked her, is it okay if I use it? She said, I'd prefer that we call him something else because that's the nickname we use. The name seems very sacred. It's really hard for her to use. And I said, absolutely. And that's how we refer to the baby, as something else. And she's getting to a point now where she's feeling a little bit more like, I want to say his name. And it's okay if you say that too. So we're just always checking in with people. How do you want me to refer to your baby? Sometimes they may not want you to call it baby, because sometimes that makes it a little more real and kind of, makes that loss feel more hurt. Is like, well, I didn't think about, especially I see this a lot with the TFMR community, is like, I didn't want to start thinking about that as a baby because then it made it too hard. And then someone, like a sonographer comes in and says, oh, well, let's talk about, what's going on. And I see your little girl. And someone was like, I didn't know the sex and I didn't want to know it. And that just made it really hard. That's what made me feel, even more guilty, is that all the things that come up for someone in that population. So it's very important that we check in with people. How did they want to identify? How did they want to talk about it?
Yeah. That is very important. One memory, I'll share this with you before we wrap up, but my nurse, she was like just the most amazing person. And still to this day, like I have these gifts that I bought for her in this letter and I've never gotten it to her yet. But she referred to Evelyn as Pumpkin. And she's like, all right, Pumpkin, let's go get dressed. She spent that entire 8 hours after I gave birth treating her like a real baby. all right, let's go. Hey, sweet girl, let's go do this. My little pumpkin, let's go. We got to get ready for your pictures. We got to take our bath. Let's change, put your diaper on. That piece is what literally stuck with me out of everything that could have happened that day, was her humanizing and validating that she was literally had a heartbeat less than 10 hours ago.
She existed. She does still exist. Yeah.
So I think that's probably one of the biggest pieces too, that people need to reach out to somebody, why they need to see you or, another therapist, because they need somebody to tell them like, yes, you are allowed to grieve this. And, your family might be like, well, it's time to move on now. But I'm realizing, that this will never go away because she was supposed to be here with us. We had a whole life planned with her. We had just dreams with her.
All the milestones that come up. And I tell people all the time, get ready. This is going to be like a trauma-versary that's coming up when you come to due dates, when you come to termination dates, or the date of the 20-week scan, if you got there, or the day they were born, which was the day they died, or that they were born dead, right?
I know. And it's literally, it can be a normal random day that we give it meaning. So it's not like just a typical, holiday, but like the day we found out they were a girl, or the day that they passed their 20-week scan. Like these dates that we don't realize are so significant, because a typical baby, they reach that milestone. That's great. But it's just more intense when that baby is no longer here. And you're like, on that day, you go through all the feelings that you had when you went through that day again, and you're not expecting it. There's a mom, a lost mom that I follow on Instagram. I think it's Mamas Matter Here. And I don't know if she turned this, but it was just, it popped up, and between October and December, she calls the grief gauntlet, because it's a series of triggering or activating days and milestones that it's like one after the other. And it's like a holiday season where everybody's like, happy.
And all the pictures, right? Of the first Christmas, or the Halloween costumes, or the first day of school, things like that. Yeah.
All of those things. And it's crazy how much it affects us. And of course, you're never, unless you go through it, there's no need for you to experience it or have those experiences. But yeah. Well, so let's wrap up. I mean, we definitely still this episode. Awesome. But if you could tell one mom one thing and one piece of advice, what would it be? And also one of your favorite resources for just maybe getting through holidays, since we're in the holiday season. Like, what's one, I don't know, show or podcast episode or book, or one resource that you would tell them to look at? And I can always put them in the show notes too.
Well, what I would say is you're valid in whatever you're feeling, whatever emotion you have, however you need to share that, as little or as much as you need to is fine. Find the people that you can do that with. There are people out there that you can do that. And that's a great thing about therapy with someone who's specially trained in perinatal loss, is we will be able to witness and hear that story as many times as you need to tell it. There's never too many. Never. I think my favorite resources is just, once you go on Instagram and you find like the good, you start liking some of the ones of any type of, where it's like still a mom, or you start just seeing a lot of other ones pop up. And I think sometimes, that might be activating to see that on your feed all the time. But I think that's really helpful for some people too, is just to know they're not isolated. They're not alone. There are other people who have walked these steps as well and are still going through it. It, like you said, it never stops. Even if it's years later, it's okay that it still comes up. So I think that I do like Instagram in that way. It's just seeing, because a lot of people there's some really great tools out there. And I do like Don't Talk About the Baby, the documentary, just in the fact that it covers, from people who were trying to conceive and never were able to conceive to, like it sounds like in your situation, your story of that, like we didn't know and everything's fine. And then, wow, what just happened? And just to hear the stories of there's so many different ways to process and grieve and go around it. And I think you hear a lot of different things with that. But if there's a group that you can join when it feels right, that's my other resource recommendation is finding a group.
Okay. Yeah. Awesome. Yeah. Community is definitely one of those things that I always pull for lost moms. And like, at first it might seem intimidating. At first it might be awkward. It might be hard, but eventually you'll realize how healing it is to be with people who are where you are or where you were, and they're better. And that gives you hope. So, well, Lacey, thank you so much for being here. I know it took us forever to finally get together just because life. It's been a crazy few months, honestly, for my family. And I know for you and your practice.
So. We're going, getting close to a new year, better or worse.
Yeah. So thank you so much for being here. And I will, for everybody listening, I will post Lacey's just bio, all about her, and then the resources that she talked about, including the documentary and probably a little excerpt about Sandtray. I'll link that, the thing that you were talking about for the Sandtray Association, just to have it as a resource.
And anyone, if you get my information, like my page, reach out anytime. I love to talk about this with any and everybody. It's so important. So thank you.
Yeah. Amazing. Well, thank you so much. Thank you so much for tuning into this week's episode of the Pregnancy Loss Podcast. I hope you feel just a little bit lighter knowing you are not alone. Don't forget to share this episode or podcast with another person who may need the message. It is so helpful for me to help others find me. I'll see you next week for another episode of the Pregnancy Loss Podcast. Have a great week. Bye.